Hi, I'm Dan Schmitt, and this is Team Chicago Challenge. We're at Arlington Park, grandstands in the background, and they're being torn down. It's a terrible thing, and I'm with my good friend, Bob Paolella. Now, Bob and I go all the way back to when I was driving the coffee truck, and I was Coffee Dan, and you were running a job
at LaSalle and Division.
LaSalle and Division. That's back when that area was Boys Town.
Right.
Before they moved up north by Wrigleyville.
And that was when they started rehabbing that whole area.
Right.
Because
that was pretty run down.
Oh, it was. You know, it was not too far from Cabrini, and then, of course, now Cabrini's down, and that's been gentrified, upscale housing.
So we're talking, that was probably 1971, 72?
Yeah, right. That's
so how did you get in the construction business?
Well, I mean, I got a degree from Illinois Institute of Technology in civil engineering.
Okay.
Went to work for the state of Illinois in 1960 on the Eisenhower Expressway.
Oh, really?
So I was there when they opened the Eisenhower Expressway up, so I'm giving away my age, Dan.
Right. Okay. So you got into construction, you were running that job.
That's correct.
Were you with Walsh by then?
No, I was at Corrigan Construction.
Okay, and then you eventually ended up at Walsh.
Right.
Okay, so these are big construction companies in Chicago that were building, and I had the coffee truck, and I was going to these different jobs, and it was, you know, a great time to be in the business.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we're here at Arlington. So the main thing we're going to talk about, 2 races in 1970, and that's why...
Well, 71. This is actually September of 71.
71 was...
71 was the Arlington Mile.
Okay.
And that was done on a one-time basis. They tried to do more of them, but they were turned down by the village. But it was Madison Square Garden Enterprises, who owned Arlington, and Don Breimer, who was the promoter.
Okay.
And he was promoting races on all kinds of horse tracks and tracks like that in the early 70s.
And they had Yamaha, so it was a Yamaha Gold Cup race.
Absolutely.
On the mile.
Right.
So how many people showed up at this event?
It was full. They said at that time it was the biggest crowd they ever had since the beginning of Arlington, about 25,000.
25,000 people. I was there, I know, I was watching that. And, but I wasn't racing then. I mean, I got my professional license in 72. But I was racing amateur to get my amateur status, and then I could get my pro license, because I wanted to race at Santa Fe Speedway.
Yeah.
But after seeing this race, now I don't have any footage from this race. I do have footage from Jan Gabriel, our old friend Jan Gabriel, who did his supercharger show at Hawthorne. So as we're talking now, I'm going to show some footage of a mile track.
Okay.
Because a mile track really is the fastest flat track event that you could be in. They get up to 130 miles an hour in a straightaway and go through the corners at nearly 100 miles an hour. And this being a cushion track, it was really spectacular. I mean, it was...
Well, don't forget, the racetrack is very soft. The horse racetrack is very soft. So they brought in blades, and they windrowed all the soft stuff to the edges.
Right.
And it was a very, very... a nice track. Didn't have a groove. You could take a high line, you could take a low line. Right. Everybody was all over the place on the track.
Right.
And Cal Rayburn was the winner of the race, and before he got involved in road racing, and of course he was killed in I think in New Zealand.
Racing for Suzuki.
Exactly. So, but he was also a good flat tracker.
Right. All right. Well, the one thing we should point out about Cal, that's a year before the XR750 aluminum engine came out. So he did win it with the iron cylinder 750 engine. And now I'm going to look for the results. I'll do maybe a voiceover or something and talk about the results of this race. Cal Rayburn won the Expert. Back then, AMA, it was, let me think again. For AMA racing, it was experts and juniors ran together.
That's correct.
And I know that second place in the junior race was Tommy Collins, who worked at Midwest Triumph, who was where I was buying my Triumph parts at that time. So, but your involvement with this is the other thing we got to talk about. You were involved were promoting the InterAM race in Elkhorn, Wisconsin.
At Turtle Park.
Turtle Park.
That was in October of '71, and we did some cross promotions here
Exactly.
with the people at Arlington. Tom Rivera at that time was the head of publicity, and I worked close with him. I had pass here. I had the. I could go any place on the track I wanted. I actually met Bill Davidson, the son of William Davidson,
Who was one of the
and
founders.
the father of Willie G. Davidson.
Right.
And I met him here. It was a spectacular race. They were all worried about riots and motorcycle gangs and stuff like that. None of that happened.
Right.
The police actually said that this crowd was better than the average horse race crowd.
Right.
Now, the reason I got involved with them is that we got involved in promoting motocross races at Turtle Park. A guy by the name of Bruce Hartwell owned the property,
Okay.
and his partner was Jack Morgan, who promoted the races there. Now, up until the late 60s,
So that was a regular motocross track.
it was there before.
And it's just north of Elkhorn, the town, off of 12.
Right.
And it's now a golf course, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, all
It's
right.
now a golf course, but
Right.
at that time, they were running amateur motocross
Right.
races in the 60s. And then when they started bringing over some of the Europeans to race over here, Edison Dye was the guy that started bringing European motocross riders over.
Right.
And Turtle Park was able to get a sanction, a date for one of the races here in October of 1971. Jack Morgan approached Les Klinko. Les Klinko owned Northwest Honda, which was at Dempster and let's see, what was the other street? Milwaukee Avenue, Milwaukee and Dempster.
Oh, okay. Before he moved to
Well,
Northwest Highway.
well, that's another story. That's
Okay.
when he sold it to Des Plaines Honda, which was Claude and Diane
Right,
Sunday,
right,
and
right,
then
right.
the rest is history. So, I had a CZ at that time. I had a 250 CZ,
Right.
and I was just playing around with it. I never raced very much, but
Right.
Les came and asked me if I was interested in investing in some money in order to help promote the race in 1971. And I said, yeah, I am absolutely interested, but I said we should form our own corporation. We should do a joint venture. So what we did was we found some people, local people in the Chicago area and also in the Lake Geneva area, and we came up with enough money that we could promote this race properly.
Because it was going to be a big spectator event. It was going
Oh,
to be
it is,
average because
yeah.
it was part of the new InterAM series
That is correct.
that was bringing in European riders to. Because you got to, let me point this out. When I got involved with racing in 1970, anything before 1970, I knew nothing about motorcycle racing. Motocross was just at its beginning. It was really, in this country, it was an offshoot of scrambles.
Right.
Scramble racing.
Hair scrambles, they called it a lot of different stuff
Right.
in those days.
And in Europe, motocross was getting bigger and bigger, and they had companies involved. You had and right here by the train station. So you had European companies, motorcycle builders who were involved with motocross, and the Japanese were starting to get.
Not yet. Japanese,
yet.
no, you had CZ, obviously, you had
Okay.
Husqvarna,
Right.
you had OSA,
Right.
you had Bultaco, Montesa, you had a
So you had
ton,
Spanish companies and
Swedes
Right.
and Europeans. And what we did in 1971 in order to get some publicity is we brought Torleif Hansen over.
okay.
Now, there's a fellow by the name of Wally Wallenberg, and those of you who read Racer X
magazine.
his son, Scott Wallenberg, is the editor of Racer X
Racer
magazine.
X, right.
And so his father, Wally, he knew some of these motocross people. So Torleif Hansen came over and stayed with him. And Wally was able to get Johnny Morris, and those of you who are old enough to remember Johnny Morris,
who played for the Chicago Bears.
right? He was the announcer, the sportscaster.
And he was a sportscaster on CBS, I think.
So he said, you bring Torleif Hansen, which Wally Wallenberg, bring Torleif Hansen over to Soldier Field,
Right.
because I'm going to be over there, and then bring some background footage.
Right.
So we got major market
Exposure.
publicity
On the 6 o'clock news or whatever.
Exactly,
Right.
10 o'clock news. So, come the day of the race, it's raining. Okay, so we're expecting a giant, big crowd there, which we did. We got 15,000 people there.
Right.
And plus, a lot of people snuck in because we had really bad security.
Right.
So financially, we didn't do so good.
Right.
But we also were able to get a sanction for what they call the Trans AMA, which was the following year in 1972. So we did run one more race in 1972, and again, motocross racing is not for the faint of, or promotion is not for the faint of heart, because you got to take into account all kinds of stuff, especially the weather, and we were not able to make enough money to proceed.
To continue on.
Plus the fact,
Right.
as motocross racing became more popular in the States, it became more sophisticated. In those days, we used a rubber band gate, and Dan,
Right.
you know what a rubber band
Yes,
gate is?
well, I
okay.
use that with the ice race.
Okay.
So you took a surgical tube, and that's what you pulled across, and the starter would let that go, and people would go. That's before they built the mechanical gates that
Right.
they use now.
And what happened was, as motocross became more popular, the promoters had to increase their investment in the facilities.
Right.
So you had those gates, and you had permanent buildings there, and then you wound up having to have all kinds of safety equipment and doctors and ambulances, and Bruce Hartwell decided that he didn't want to proceed with all those expenses, and he wound up selling the property, and it, as Dan was saying, it turned into a
Golf course.
golf course.
Well, let me. Yeah, now that you bring back my memory, and you're saying it was 71, I always thought it was 70. So 71, let me tell you, I was there. And the reason I can tell you I was there, in 1970, when I got into racing the first time, I'll give a brief history of that. Joe Scarlato, who also drove a coffee truck, he picked up a 250 OSA. And we were both loading up at Door Brothers, so we seen each other every day. And I went to Sycamore Speedway with him and saw the TT racing at the Scrambles racing at Sycamore Speedway, which is on North Avenue in Sycamore.
Right, still there.
Still there. Okay. So Joe bet me $10 that I wouldn't race, and that was 1970. I had a 1968 Triumph Bonneville, you know, same engine as
Very
like this
similar,
bike
yeah,
here,
right.
but a street bike. I took off the headlight, took off the tail light, and I made the last race at Sycamore Speedway. So that was my first official race. The next week I went to Millburg Speedway, which is outside of Benton Harbor, and that became my second official race. So I had one season. To get a professional license, you had to prove 2 seasons of racing. So the next year I took the gas tank off and the seat off. I put a BSA fiberglass tank. I got a different seat for the bike, and I had that bike set up to go racing. It so happened when they had the InterAM race, because flat track does not race in the rain. So it's raining. I decided I'm not going to go to Millburg that Sunday to race the TT, and I did go to the InterAM race. So I was at that race that you were promoting.
Yeah.
At this point of the conversation, Bob and I decided that destruction sound was getting too loud. So we decided to move to the front gate of Arlington Park. And the sun also came out as we continue our conversation.
Okay, Dan, so we did the first race, the InterAM at Turtle Park 71, and it rained that day. We had a $15,000 purse. We had a nice crowd. So we decided we're going to try it again in 1972, and we did that again. That was called the Trans AMA in 72, and that race had a nice crowd too, although we spent a lot more money for promotion. And one of the big problems in promoting races today is you need to have an outside sponsor. Nobody can do any sort of big events without outside sponsors. We tried to get Schlitz. Schlitz was interested, but did not give us any sort of a sponsorship. Because of that, we had to finance the entire race on our own. We decided after that race, we lost, I think, $5,000 or $10,000, which was big money in 1972, and that was it. We stopped promoting races after 1972.
So at that same time, Bob, you were still working, you were doing construction, so the promoting thing was only like a part-time.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically Jack Morgan did the overwhelming majority of the race. We were partners with him. He was a motocross circus or something like, I don't remember exact name of the company, but Motocross Circus, and we were Cross Incorporated, and we were just a bunch of guys that came up with a few bucks to help Jack finance the races. So him and Bruce Hartwell was the owner of the property, and that was a farm, and after we stopped doing the races there, then Bruce sold his property and they turned it into a golf course.
So even Turtle Park didn't last much longer afterwards.
A couple of years more. They went back to amateur motocrossing.
But you were right there in the beginning of the InterAM with the AMA. So it was a InterAMA it became in 72.
Well, here's what it was. Edison Dye, back in the late 60s, decided he was going to bring motocross over to this country. So he brought over guys like Torsten Hallman and
Torleif Hansen,
a lot of Swedes, you know,
right.
and the guy that's in charge of the KTM motocross.
Roger DaCosta.
Roger DaCosta was one of the guys.
Right.
So he came out, and Turtle Park decided in '71 that they wanted to do, one of his races, and that's how it started. That was really the beginning of motocross in this country. And Turtle Park, Dan, was one of the better tracks around. In fact, if you watch motocross today on TV, those tracks did not compare to Turtle Park. And if you ask any of the old timers, they'll tell you that Turtle Park was probably the best park in the United States.
One of the best tracks.
One of the best tracks in the United States. Unfortunately, money was the reason, and Bruce decided to sell the property to build the golf course. Right. And that was the end of it.
So he had nothing to do with the golf course.
No, it was Man. Man was an excavating company. They bought the property, and the golf course is there now. Right.
You can drive by it. So if you stay on 12, and then 12, once you get past Elkhorn, go past it. When it joins and becomes a regular road again, a regular two-lane road, you will go by that golf course.
Well, then you head north.
Right.
There's a crossroads, and then the entrance to the track was right around the corner from 12 and the crossroads. And it's too bad, but the amount of money that you need today to set up a track with all the infrastructure and all the labor involved, and you have to have those gates. We used a rubber band gate in those days.
Well, I mean, places like Maplehurst, they finally shut down. It seems like you got to be a real enthusiast. Like Byron is still running motocross, and so there still is motocross. There's probably more motocross racing than there is any flat track.
But those tracks never did any pro stuff.
No.
There were a few that did races in those days.
Like Redbud. Well, Redbud does okay. Right.
And there's Unadilla.
Right.
There's a couple on the West Coast. And that's the new motocross circuit that we have now. And of course, with this year, they got the combined motocross and supercross, and they are going to have some semifinals, one of which is going to be at Route 66 Raceway in September, and then they're going to have a final at the Coliseum and it's going to be like the Super Bowl.
So I'm going to see what I can do if I Route 66 if they invite me in.
Well, you should be able to get in.
Right. Well, I hope they invite me in.
Yeah, I hope so too. Well, they got to know that you're around, Dan.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the films. You came up. You finally gave me the films. I had them converted over, so now I can show some of this footage, and I think it's very classic footage. First of all, you did the film at Daytona, the 200 mile. I'm going to show a little clip of that. And that's when Nixon finished second, and Pat Henning was third, and the kid from South America,
Johnny Cicado,
he won that race.
Yeah.
And I was probably there that day also, because I used to go to Daytona every year for the 200 mile race.
I don't remember, it was early 70s, because Nixon was on a 4-stroke Kawasaki. He was not on the H2, which I can't remember the fella's name, but there was.
Well, it was 74 was the race.
It was 74. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there was a guy that raced a 750 H2 2-stroke, but he was killed a couple of years earlier. I can't think of the guy's name offhand.
All right.
So that was the end of the H2s running at Daytona.
And the end of the. Well, then the rules have changed from. Then Superbike came along, because I raced Daytona the first year they had Superbikes on Saturday, a 100-mile race, and that was in '83.
But you know, after that, then Honda got big in it.
Right.
And they had Dick Mann, and they had.
No, but that was in '70. Dick Mann won in '70.
Okay, what about Agostini? What year was that? When
he probably won in '72.
Okay. And then Honda got out of it, I guess.
Right. Okay, so. The other footage you have, and there's a little interview with me and a little interview with our friend Chuck, and I'm going to show that. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about, you got my qualifying lap and you got some of my heat race, so we're going to show some of that footage.
That was Henry, Illinois.
Henry, Illinois, and that footage looks pretty good. You did a pretty good job there. And then, and we're going to finalize this, you shot at Road America.
Yeah.
And it was Wes Cooley winning.
That's correct.
And it was a real great deal, I think. You know, I think Wes Cooley was and the footage looks great. You did a great job on that footage.
Did you notice the crowd at Road America? They don't get those kind of crowds anymore for motorcycle racing. Now that they have Moto America, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Moto America, but in those days at Road America, they had guys that would be racing all over the world. I mean,
right.
Wes Cooley went all over the world.
Right.
And Freddie Spencer raced there in his era. So the guys you got racing now are good guys, but I don't think there's as much popularity from the general public to go to motorcycle racing, road racing.
Well, it seems like all racing is hurting a little bit, and like I said, a lot of this has to do with politics. I got into motorcycle racing in 1970s. Who was the president? Nixon. How was the economy? The economy was doing great, and Nixon was toning down the Vietnam War also, so Nixon was really pretty good of a president. Then in the 80s I got into road racing. Who was the president? The president was Reagan. Everybody could road race in 1980 because every 20-year-old had $2,000 or $3,000 of disposable money.
Well, listen, I'm not a Biden supporter, but this year is the biggest motocross, supercross series ever because they combined both of them. So I'm not sure I agree with you that politics has a lot to do with it.
Well, I always think that politics has something to do with everything. And the other thing, you've never heard a well, there was one Republican, but as far as getting people off of motorcycles, as far as taking away our rights, it's always seemed to have been Democrats over the years.
Well, that's true. Although, ironically, the state of Illinois, which probably has the worst politicians, still has no helmet law.
Right.
It's one of the few states that don't require wearing a helmet. So, I'm not sure I agree completely with the politics end of it, what you're saying.
Right.
So.
All right. Well, Bob, it's always great. I mean, our friendship goes back.
Oh yeah.
As long
50
as
years.
Okay, so let's recap what we talked about here. First of all, the Yamaha Gold Cup,
which was September 1971. It was one and done. They try to do it again next year. The people in the neighborhoods complain and shot them down. And then they did race one race at Washington Park, same promoter, Madison Square Enterprises, Don Breimer, and that was it for the horse tracks. Well, Hawthorne, they did race
Hawthorne, right, because the footage I showed when we were talking about mile racing, Jan Gabriel was doing his TV show Superchargers, and him and Gene Romero were the host to do the race from Hawthorne. So we're showing that footage. But Hawthorne ran maybe 2 or 3 years.
I think so. I think so. And as far as the motocross goes, 71 and 72 were the only years that we did outdoor motocross in the Chicago area at a professional level. But we did have a Supercross race here once a few years back at Route 66. So we're kind of a desert when it comes to professional motorcycle racing in Chicago. And of course, those of us, like Dan and I, we remember every Wednesday night at Santa Fe Park.
Santa Fe was the greatest.
Which they had the best racers in the country that raced there every week.
And 2 nationals a year.
That's exactly correct.
Right.
So maybe someday someone will come up and they'll do some more racing in the Chicago area. Let's hope.
That'd be great.
Okay, Dan. It's a pleasure as always.
Yes. A great conversation with my friend, Bob Paolella. To contact me, and I love to hear from the audience, it's teamdan45@gmail.com. And remember, you can always search on YouTube with Dan Schmitt, Motorcycle Racing for great motorcycle racing action, Dan Schmitt Politics to learn what makes America great. And I highly encourage you to visit the World of Motorcycle Museum. They're in Winnemac, Indiana, 4 miles south of North Judson on Indiana Highway 39. Give them a call first at 574-896-3172. It's a great trip and a great collection of motorcycles. Pick up your Team Chicago information package. That's right, I put this package together. It's at Rich's Yamaha. They're in Lockport, Illinois. Give them a call first at 815-838-8130. Their website is richesyamaha.com. Pick up your information package.